Hey everybody, welcome to the Building Bridges podcast. We really want to just inspect minority gaps in engineering, and with that, we are going to get started with this presentation. So, basically, an overview of this podcast. Our targeted audience would mainly be engineers in the majority. So, Danny and I have experienced a lot of just mainly white and Asian engineering students. So, we are trying to see how we can maybe diversify the engineering programs at both here at UAUC and then engineering programs here. And we want to develop more talks about the gaps of minority groups in engineering, which we'll get to with the episodes when we talk about those, and how there should be more social justice education in engineering. Both of us, Danny and I, are in engineering, so we see this discrepancy from just the observation of being in engineering and just from hearing the viewpoints of our friends who we've interviewed for this podcast. This will help us and our audience be more aware of the gap that has occurred in engineering fields. And we also want to provide stories that tell the audience how there can be more representation and conversations in engineering. So with this podcast, we have given a few stories from our friends that they would just like to share with us about these minority gaps. So for the first episode, I conducted a conversation about LGBTQ plus in engineering by interviewing a friend who is a part of that community, and he's majoring in engineering physics. And basically, we wanted to go over for this episode the implicit and explicit discouragements that might appear in engineering. We talked about organizations that welcome LGBTQ students in engineering, and we just wanted to, just really get that story out there and see how well physics was doing. And then below, we have some questions too about basically what I've interviewed my friend Brian about for this podcast.
So for my episode of the podcast, I'm going to be discussing university culture regarding the Hispanic community and an interview with one of my friends who is in the ECE department with me and is also a member of the Hispanic Society of Engineers. This interview is going to be geared more as a conversation than a straightforward interview. We will be discussing the campus culture and why there is such a disparity within the ECE department specifically, but also with the engineering field as a whole. This is going to hit on relatively broad topics and will be more of an interviewee-focused conversation. Included in this slide are the key questions that we will be going over. So in the final episode, we're going to be gathering a bunch of answers and takeaways that we got from our individual interviews. This will take the form of discussion as opposed to another interview. So we're going to go over certain things in the interviews that we learned, that were shocking or surprising to us, and this will be very solution-focused. We're going to be taking some of the anecdotes and opinions of the people from these communities that we are talking to, and including that with additional outside research to present solutions that the department or students within the department should follow to promote inclusivity in engineering. So the tone and language of this podcast is going to flow much like a casual conversation with this topic through interviews with our friends. This honestly will take the form of an outlet for some people who feel unheard, potentially, to share their stories and opinions on how the engineering department is representing them. We are taking the Seeing White podcast as a lot of inspiration because, much like the host of that podcast, we are two white men. We would like the conversations to be guided by the people we are interviewing as opposed to us trying to make sense of it all. So it will be a very broad focus on our interviewees. Additionally, we are going to be using professional vocabulary as labels or categories to put some of these issues into. These include the educational gap, the moral gap, and social justice education.
So just some overall goals for the Building Bridges podcast. Again, we're just really trying to investigate the representation and use of social justice education, specifically in the UIUC engineering department. And we hope with this to spark similar conversations in other schools' engineering programs, because we believe that there should honestly be more opportunities for social justice education in engineering. Obviously, we don't know a lot of other engineering programs and how they do it, but hopefully that if they see some kind of discrepancy in their program, that they can feel the need to kind of bridge this gap better. We are going to be observing the gaps that have formed in engineering, mainly educational and moral gaps with the topics that we've chosen. And really, we just want to find out where these discouragements of minority groups in engineering are coming from and find ways to combat these discouragements coming into engineering programs.